spent most of your life being told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, that you need to toughen up, let things go, stop taking everything so personally, this episode is for you. Today, I'm going to walk you through what the research actually says about being a highly sensitive person, or HSP. We'll look at what's happening in your brain, why the world feels so intense for you, how to recognize this trait in yourself, and most importantly, what you can actually do with this information so your sensitivity stops ruining or running your life and starts working for you instead, because it really can. And as always, I'm going to give you 5 practical tools so you can start feeling more at ease with who you are right now. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the podcast. This has been something a couple people in my online One Love Collective on Substack, a couple people in there, a couple members have been asking me for a while, and I'm finally getting to it, and I'm really happy I did. I spent a lot of time researching for this one. I wanted to do it justice for my people, and I know that it comes up with my own clients and everything else, and I'll talk about it, but I have a great free download today to help you assess if you're an HSP or not, and all the things. So stay tuned. If any of what I said in the beginning is ringing true for you, then, listen to the episode, see if maybe you fit in this category. It might explain a lot. So here's what I want you to know up front. There's nothing wrong with you. I'm going to say it again. There's nothing wrong with you. I mean it. I'm not blowing sunshine up your booty. I mean what I'm saying. I'm not doing this to make you feel better. That's not how I operate, as you know, if you've been with me a while. What you've been experiencing, it's not a character flaw, it's or a weakness or a sign that something went sideways in your development. This is a neurological trait called sensory processing sensitivity. Okay. And it's been studied scientifically really since the early 90s. And it has a name, it has a biological basis, and we think it affects somewhere between 15 and 30% of the population. That's a big number. Overall. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about different countries in this episode. The research in different countries, it got too crazy. So just listen and see wherever you're from if this fits for you. You're not too much, right? You're wired differently. And once you understand how and why, I think everything changes, and I know it has for my clients. So let's talk about it. What is a highly sensitive person? And that term, HSP, highly sensitive person, was coined by a psychologist named Dr. Elaine Aron in the mid 90s. The scientific term for the underlying trait is sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS, okay? And Aron and her husband, Arthur Aron, formally identified it in 97 through a series of 7 kind of famous studies. And they established it as a distinct, measurable kind of personality trait, not a disorder, not a diagnosis, not something that needs to be fixed. I want to be clear, okay? But really something that's in the personality from a biological basis. Now, the scientific definition that was described a little later by Boderberg and colleagues is an increased sensitivity of the central nervous system. That's how they define it. And a deeper cognitive processing of physical, social, and emotional stimuli. So what is that, Abby? In plain language, your nervous system picks up more, processes it more thoroughly, and reacts more strongly to everything. So sounds, light, textures, other people's moods, the undercurrent, of tension in the room, right? The beauty of a piece of music, all of it. And again, Aron estimated that about 15 to 20% of the population has this trait. Again, some of the newer research shows about 30, up to 30, but whatever, right? So either way, so it's 20 or 30, 15, 30, 20%, whatever. That's hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Okay? That's really what we're talking about. The trait has also been observed in over 100 other species. Get that, from fruit flies to primates. Crazy. Biologists consider it an evolutionary survival strategy, to pause before acting, to observe before committing, to detect what other people miss. So being an HSP isn't new, and it's really not rare. What's rare is that we're actually starting to understand it in the last 40 years, okay? So, and by the way, for my new people, whenever I mention the research or any, like the free downloads for today or anything else, everything can be found. If you're watching on YouTube, it can be found under the video, or you can go to my website. Just go to this episode. I write a full blog. So if you're trying to take notes furiously, you don't have to. I've already written the blog. You can copy and paste it later. That's how much I love you. And it's a blog, not a transcript. So it's like a nicely laid out blog. And all the free downloads are there, all the links to the research, everything. So, you don't have to trust me if you want to read for yourself. And when I find the research, I do, because I pay for the journals and stuff, and it's expensive and you can't always get access, but I do try to find the PDFs for things if I can find them, or, something that you could look at. I try to use the National Institute of Health, things like that, where you could actually read the articles, and not pay for the journal. That's how much I love you. Yes, I really do think about all the levels. Okay, so let's talk about what's called the DOES framework, DOES. There's basically, these are the 4 things that are probably true about you. So Dr. Aaron developed this framework, the Elaine Aaron, the woman. I mean, it's hard because there's the 2 Aarons, right? And they work together, but it's really, I think of her. So she developed this framework called DOES, DOES, to capture the 4 core characteristics of sensory processing sensitivity. And all 4 need to be present to fit the full HSP profile, okay? So if you're listening and nodding along, this is likely a framework that describes you, right? So let's get into it. So DOES, right? The D is for depth of processing. And this is really the foundation of everything else. HSPs don't just take information in. They process it more deeply, more elaborately, really at higher levels of organization. And there's one research I was reading, and I forget pronouncing this name. It's like Jadzia Jagilowitz. Again, I'll link to it. But that researcher found that HSPs use more of the brain regions, is so cool, associated with deeper processing, especially on tasks that involve noticing subtleties. How cool is that? So in everyday life, this shows up as thinking carefully before making decisions, reflecting on conversations long after they're over, connecting dots other people don't connect, finding meaning in things other people probably walk right past. So what looks like overthinking from the outside, in many ways, is actually your brain doing more work. To me, that's not a bug, that's a feature, right? That's really great. And whenever I'm working with organizations around hiring people, you can see how good it is to have an HSP on your team or in a group, right? I don't know that I'd only want HSPs, but I wouldn't only want people who are, really quick and jumping to decisions either, right? So, when you're putting together a really healthy work team, or dare I say relationship, it's very helpful to have an HSP on board. Okay, so the O is for overstimulation. And so because you're processing more deeply, you reach your limit faster than most. Loud environments, crowded spaces, long social events, too many tasks at once. These aren't just annoying for you. They're physiologically draining in a way that they're just not for non-HSPs. I'm telling you, it's different. Overstimulation is the predictable, unavoidable result of a nervous system that's working harder than average all the time. That's the best way to say that. Again, the problem's not that, you're weak or broken somehow. The problem is that you've been living in a world that's, of course, largely designed for people whose brains work differently than yours. That's the problem. All right, the E is for emotional reactivity and empathy. HSPs feel things more intensely, both their own emotion and other people's, okay? And again, in other research, there's again been research, and that same person, it's like JAGIELLOWICZ. Like I think I am spelling that correctly. The last name is crazy. Anyway, Jagilowitz, I'm going to go with, found that HSPs react more strongly than non-HSPs to emotionally evocative images, especially positive ones. How do you like that? There was another study. There was a fMRI, functional MRI study by Bianca Acevedo, and colleagues, and they were the first to actually scan the brains of HSPs while they responded to other people's emotions. And they found that HSPs showed significantly greater activation in the areas of the brain, get this, associated with awareness, empathy, and self kind of other processing. Okay. And that includes the insula and the mirror neuron system, all that. Your mirror neurons are lighting up harder, I guess is what would be the result of that. You're not imagining that you feel what other people feel. Like you are. The imaging data shows it. It's amazing. Okay, and the S is for sensitivity to subtleties. HSPs notice things other people miss, as I mentioned before. So like a slight change in someone's tone, and almost like an imperceptible tension in the room, the detail in a painting that most people walk past, the off note in an otherwise great meal, that kind of thing. And again, in those brain studies I just mentioned, when HSPs were shown images with subtle differences, they consistently noticed them and responded more accurately than non-HSPs. So when differences were obvious, HSP and non-HSP brains look the same, right? That's, it's the subtleties where your brain does something genuinely different. That's I think really, really cool. So, okay. So let's talk about it. What's actually happening in your brain, right? So the research on HSP brain, of course, I found it really fascinating. It's one of the reasons it took me so long to put together this. I got to tell you, this episode could be 7 hours as far as it's not. Don't worry. It's much quicker than that. But there was so much fascinating information. I really had a hard time kind of culling it down. But I want to take a moment on it because understanding this, to me, tends to be the turning point for my clients when I talk to my clients about this stuff. When you know what's actually happening neurologically, it's harder to keep telling yourself that something's wrong with you or that you should be more, you're supposed to be defending yourself or some bullshit like that. So like I said, Elaine Aron began researching high sensitivity in 1991 at SUNY Stony Brook, SUNY State University of New York. Shout out to my New Yorkers at Stony Brook. And the body of neuroscience that is built up since, I have to tell you, is substantial. And here's what it shows. Here's some of what it shows. The highly sensitive person's brain, the HSP brain, processes information at a higher level of organization. I just want to say that overall. There was one brain imaging study showing that highly sensitive participants showed more activation in the areas associated with higher order perception. So they weren't just seeing more. I want to say this really well. Some of this stuff I know gets heady, but stay with me. So what that means is they weren't just seeing more, they were doing more with what they saw. Do you can you get how cool that is? So, and in another study, I read another study when sensitive and non-sensitive participants were given perceptual tasks that are sort of typically harder depending on the, culture you might be from. The non-sensitive people showed the usual kind of cultural difficulty, right? But the HSP brains worked around it. Their brains were finding it natural, easy to look beyond the cultural expectation to how things actually are. Really cool. Acevedo, who I mentioned before, her fMRI research found particularly high activation in the insula, which is sometimes called like your seat of consciousness, because the insula integrates your moment-to-moment thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations, and your perception of the outside world, and it brings them into like a unified experience. And for HSPs, that seat of consciousness, that insula, it's more active, it's more lit up, and it's more engaged. How do you? I know, it's so cool. And then there was some really recent testing that Acevedo has done, some brain research where they found that even after an emotionally evocative experience, so even after that, some really emotionally evocative experience, HSP brains showed activity, like which suggested that they kept processing. They had like a continued depth of processing during rest, like afterwards, consolidating the memory, making meaning of it, integrating the experience, right? So if you're an HSP, what that means is you don't get to turn it off because it's not a choice you're making. It's what your brain does. I hope I'm making this really clear. And the trait, this HSP trait also has genetic roots. So there's, again, research has associated specific gene variants with SPS, with sensory processing sensitivity. There's been variants related to serotonin, to dopamine processing. So you were largely born this way is what that means. Early childhood environments, of course, can amplify or soften the trait's expression. We know that genes get expressed with environment, but the underlying wiring, that's yours. Okay. Hopefully that wasn't too much, or hopefully it was enough. So, but again, I think it's so important for you to really understand. It's so easy to write when people just sort of say something to you like, oh, you're not broken. It's great. But when you hear, I think at least for my clients, when you hear the research, it's harder to dismiss because your whole life you've been told one thing about it where it's actually kind of a liability. And to me, it doesn't need to be at all. Okay. So what does it actually look like in your life, right? Knowing the science is great. That's one thing, right? But recognizing it in your own life is another. And here's what sensory processing sensitivity tends to look like in practice. And I want you to notice how many of these you might identify with. So you feel deeply moved, usually by, music, art, natural beauty in a way that maybe can even sometimes catch you off guard. Maybe you cry at the commercials, you notice the sunset when no one else does, things like that. You pick up on other people's moods, often before they've said a word. It's like, you're that person who can feel the tension in a room the moment you walk in. People probably describe you as intuitive or perceptive. They might even get a little unnerved by how much you notice about them. That might be there. Another characteristic is you need alone time to recover after social events, even ones you genuinely enjoyed. And again, I want to separate this from introversion and extroversion because that doesn't have to be the same thing. I think a lot of times HSPs can be more introverted in a way, but I think that's only because society, they're tired of being judged. So they end up kind of pulling back a little. And for you, the recovery isn't optional. It's not. Your nervous system needs it to come back into balance. And when you think about relationships and work and romance and your family, how important that is and how much you probably were beat up about it growing up. You think carefully. And granted, sometimes too carefully before you make decisions, okay? You consider, you're that person who considers multiple angles, you imagine multiple outcomes, and you can get probably stuck in your own head because the processing doesn't stop, right? It goes on, and you can see how this can link to anxiety, especially in a world where there's so many choices now, where there's so much going on. Our brains, it's hard to catch up, and your brain especially is hard to catch up. You're also generally deeply affected by violence, by cruelty, injustice. So that could be the movies, the news. I usually suggest to my clients that they avoid certain content entirely because the impact on you isn't worth it. I need to say. You're highly attuned to physical sensations. So things like, scratchy fabric, bright lights, strong smells, caffeine, your hunger, your thirst. Your body is as sensitive as your emotional world is really what it is, if you think of it that way. And connected to that, you have a really rich inner life, usually. Your inner world, it's vivid, it's complex, and it matters deeply to you. Even when the people around you don't fully understand it, it matters deeply to you. And again, if you're still not sure about all this, the free download for today is a self-assessment, and it's based on Dr. Elaine Aron's research. So I'm calling it, are you a highly sensitive person? And you can get that for free, again, everywhere I mentioned. And I do have a great Therapy to Go bundle if you want to do some deeper work. I'll tell you about all that at the end, but there you go. Okay, so now, before we go further, I want to address the three things HSP gets most confused with, because I think clarity is really important here. So, and I already mentioned the one. HSP is not the same as introversion. Okay, it's not the same. The research established this really clearly. Roughly 30% of HSPs are actually extroverted. Introversion is about where you get your energy, preferring quiet and solitude. Sensory processing sensitivity is about how deeply your nervous system processes all stimuli, all social, sensory, emotional, everything. So the two obviously often overlap, but they're really distinct. So I want to say that first. Number two, HSP is not the same as anxiety. And this one, this is the harder one. It's really more nuanced. HSPs do experience higher rates of anxiety, and we'll talk about why in a moment. But anxiety isn't the trait itself. It's a possible consequence of the trait being unmanaged or unsupported. That's what I have found. So many HSPs who understand and work with their sensitivity, they don't struggle with clinical anxiety at all. How do you like that? I know. And then number three is that HSP, it's not a disorder. It is not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM that is our Bible for diagnosing. It's not in there. It's not a clinical diagnosis. Aron and her colleagues have consistently and explicitly stated that sensory processing sensitivity, it's a personality trait, not a pathology. Do not pathologize this. The problem isn't your sensitivity. The problem is that the world you've been living in wasn't built with your nervous system in mind, right? Which brings me to, why has this been so hard? And this is something I think is really important to understand. Being an HSP is in an unsupportive environment is hard in a specific, measurable way. Okay, there's research on this. Michael Plues and Jay Belsky, building on what they call the differential susceptibility model. They found that HSPs are more affected by their environments, both negative and positive, than non-HSPs. So, and this is sometimes called, you might have heard it, the orchid hypothesis. So non-sensitive people are like dandelions. They grow just about anywhere. HSPs are more like orchids, okay? With the right conditions, they flourish in ways that are truly extraordinary, okay? Extraordinary. In the wrong conditions, they struggle more than most. That's what happens. Okay, so, and the research shows that HSPs who grew up in what I'll call difficult or unsupportive environments show higher rates of anxiety and depression. That's where we see that. But here's the flip side, and this is the part that often gets left out. HSPs who had good enough childhoods and who live in supportive conditions are actually less prone to depression than average. What do you think of that? And they disproportionately benefit from positive experiences and interventions. Amazing. Those same researchers, Pluas and Belsky, called this vantage sensitivity. the HSP nervous system's particular responsiveness to what's good, not just what's hard. Really cool. Really cool. And Elaine Aron had her own observations. She talked about it a lot. In cultures where sensitivity is valued, HSPs tend to have high self-esteem and thrive. In cultures where it isn't, and Western culture for the most part doesn't value it, HSPs are told to toughen up. And they internalize the message that they're broken, something's wrong with them, and often spend decades managing something that was never a problem in the first place. I know, a little mic drop there. I'm not going to drop my mic. It's very expensive. The difficulty isn't your wiring. The difficulty is that you've been trying to run your particular wiring on an incompatible operating system. And I got to tell you, sweetie, nobody gave you the manual. That's the problem, right? 40 years I've been doing this. 40 years. And I can tell you that one of the most powerful moments in any therapeutic relationship is when someone finally has a name for what they've been experiencing. When the story changes from something's wrong with me, I'm unlovable, I'm this, I'm too that, to when you change that story to I have a nervous system that processes this world more deeply than most people, and I need to learn how to work with that. I know it's just words to you, maybe, but that shift in narrative, it ain't small. It really can be genuinely life-changing. That's what I have found. So, okay, let me have a sip of water. Are you with me? Are we doing this? I know. It's really cool, right? I find this all fascinating. All right. Let's talk about, me. I'm so great, Abby. You told us all this. Now what? I'm going to give you 5 tools for working with your sensitivity instead of against it. Okay? Because understanding your trait, to me, that's the first step. But you need practical ways to actually live with it, right? Especially on the hard days. I know, especially on the hard days. Okay, so here are 5 tools that I have found in my practice that work. And of course, I take everything from the research. So the research says it works. This is what happens in the world for me. I read all the stuff. I talk to other, I was at a networking luncheon this weekend. I talk to other therapists. I want to know what people are doing. I want to know what's working and what's not. I look at the research. I try things with my own clients, and I can tell over time what works and what doesn't, right? And that's what I generally bring to you. Okay, that's when I do a podcast. It's because I've had generally a lot of experience in a certain area. My earrings are making so much noise. And I know the person who, they're very beautiful, my earrings, but the person who does my audio is going to be like, I can't believe she's wearing those earrings. Anyway, so I take those tools and I know that they work across the board. So it doesn't mean every one of the tools I'm about to give you is going to work for you. It means this is the best place to start because at least they're evidence-based in some way from the research, from my own practice, right? From other people's practice, blah, blah. Okay. So tool number 1 is to learn your overstimulation threshold before you hit it. I do this with people more than almost anything. Most highly sensitive people don't recognize that they're headed toward overwhelm until they're already there, till they're already irritable, flooded, shut down, in tears, and there's no obvious trigger at that point, right? The work is to move that awareness earlier. Pay attention to what your pre-overwhelm signals are. You got to know your pre-overwhelm signals. You got to start paying attention. For some people, it's body, tightening in the chest, tightening in the shoulders, jaw. You might notice a sudden need to urge to leave the room. Cognitive fog is another one where suddenly it feels like you can't think through something. Your body is giving you data before the system crashes, and you need to learn to read it earlier. I say with love, I love you, but you got to read this earlier because once you know your signals, you can intervene before you hit the wall. So you have to start paying attention. That's number 1. Tool number 2 is you need to build recovery time into your life, not just your emergencies. I know you build it into your emergencies. You have to build it into your life. HSPs tend to treat alone time and quiet as a reward for surviving a hard week. I see you. Oh, yeah. Oh, I see. You're laughing right now. I know you are. I see you. It's not a reward. It needs to be infrastructure, not a reward. Your nervous system requires, not it's a nice idea, not, oh, poor little so-and-so needs a little downtime. That's bullshit. That's not that. Your nervous system requires regular downtime to process what it's been taking in. Remember all the research? You've been taking in more than the rest of us. Again, that's not a luxury or a personality preference. It's a biological requirement. And so look at your damn calendar and ask yourself where the actual recovery is built in. If the answer is after I finish everything, I say with love, my baby, it is time to restructure. It's not going to work. And so many of you, I know because I work with you, you don't put it in. You run from meeting to meeting to meeting. There's no break all day. There's not a minute. I have some people I work with who literally haven't peed all day. They'll be like, oh, I never even peed today. I'm like, what? It's a problem. And I'm not just talking about like, yeah, go to the bathroom. That's a start. But when you go to the bathroom, you need, do a double inhale, take a mindful break, go outside. I often call these smoke breaks. Pretend if you smoked, you would go outside to smoke because you can't smoke in the building usually. You would go outside to have a cigarette. And that used to be very acceptable for people. I remember when I quit smoking, I remember this. I told because then I would sit at my desk all day. I was like, this sucks. So I remember telling my boss, I didn't tell my boss that I quit smoking. I still went out. I would say, I got to grab a cigarette. I wasn't even smoking just to go outside. I didn't know what it was then. I'm not an HSP, by the way, but I would need a break. I'm human. And I would go outside and then, I'd feel a little better. So take a smoke break and don't smoke. Okay. Tool number 3 is get strategic about your sensory input. Remember, you have a lower threshold for sensory overload than most of the people around you. And that means you have to be intentional about your environment in ways others don't need to be. And this isn't being difficult. It's being smart about how your nervous system works. So that might mean sitting with your back to the wall in a restaurant so you're not overwhelmed by movement. It might mean stepping outside at parties for 10 minutes every hour. It might mean keeping your office quieter than a colleague's. It doesn't, it's not about it's not dramatic. It's just management. I need you to manage. Think about managing. All right. Tool number 4, separate the signal from the noise. That's what I call this one. So because HSPs pick up on subtleties that like I'm missing, that other people are missing, you're also more likely to absorb and process input that's not relevant to you. So you feel the tension maybe between, let's say, like 2 coworkers, and you spend the afternoon trying to figure out if you caused it. I see you. You read something into a friend's slightly short reply and spend the evening worried about the relationship. Okay, the sensitivity that makes you perceptive also makes you a collector of other people's emotional weather. Okay, that's what it does. So one of the most useful practices for HSPs and what I tell them to do is learning to ask, is this mine? I want you to ask, is this mine all friggin' day long? That's what I want you to do. Before you start processing an emotional signal, you would pause and ask whether it actually belongs to you, whether it's about your life, your relationship, your decision. If the honest answer is no, you really need to set it down. You're allowed to set it down. You need to set it down. And tool number 5, oh, you know what it is because I haven't mentioned it yet today, and I mention it every damn episode. Use mindfulness as a regulation tool, not just a stress reducer, okay? I know. Mindfulness again, Abby? Are you kidding me? Yeah. Sorry, not sorry. There's a specific reason mindfulness matters for HSPs. Mindfulness builds the capacity to observe your experience without immediately being swept into it. We call this metacognition. For a nervous system that processes everything so deeply and reacts so strongly, that observer capacity, that metacognition is everything. It creates a small but really vital gap between the stimulus, whatever's happening out there, and your response. And that's exactly the gap you need to choose how you engage rather than just react, right? To act, not react. So super duper important. Okay, let's wrap it up. Let's wrap this up, Abby. I want to leave you with this. The goal isn't to become less sensitive. The research is pretty clear that the trait itself is largely fixed. It's a neurological reality, not a habit to be broken. The goal is to understand your sensitivity well enough that it stops running you. That's what we're looking for. When you know you're an HSP, you can stop apologizing for needing recovery time and start scheduling it. You can stop wondering why you feel so much and start working with what your nervous system is actually doing. You can stop treating every moment of overwhelm as evidence that you're failing and start treating it as data about what your particular wiring needs. Your sensitivity is also, by the way, connected to the things that probably make you exceptional. That's why I love you. I know, because I know so many of you. Your empathy, your perceptiveness, your ability to be deeply moved by beauty, your attunement to the people you love, your capacity for meaning. Oh my gosh. The research on the advantages of sensory processing sensitivity is long. I mean, I cut it down so much. Again, greater empathy, more creativity, conscientiousness, stronger responses to positive experiences, a richer inner life than the rest of us. These aren't separate from the hard parts. They're the same trait. They're the same thing. You were not built wrong. You were built to, process this world more deeply than most of us. And now you got to learn how, right? That's what it's about. So as I mentioned before, if you want to get clearer on whether you're an HSP and where the trait shows up most strongly in your life, I have a free HSP self-assessment. And again, it's built from I spent a lot of time on this one. It's built from the validated research and, reframed in a way I hope that's useful. It's not just a checklist. I tried to make it a tool for understanding yourself. And if you want to go deeper, if you're like, oh my God, this is so me, Abby, I've been nodding my head the whole time. I always have a therapy to go bundle. They're $10. I make them real inexpensive. And the bundle for this episode, it takes you through your sensitivity across every major area of your life, your relationship with yourself, if you have a partner, with your family, at work, the whole shebang. So again, you can get that $10. It includes the free download I just mentioned. And the other items in there are where does your sensitivity show up? It's an HSP pattern inventory across your whole life. The next thing is my sensitivity in my relationships. It's a worksheet for working through a specific dynamic, like a very specific situation. I always have journaling prompts for the highly sensitive person to really, help you explore who you are, what you believe, where it all came from, all the goodies. There's a nervous system first aid for HSPs. It's what to say and do when you're already overwhelmed. So all of that for $10 is in the Therapy to Go bundle, which you can get below the video if you're watching on YouTube or over on my website. Just go to this episode. Everything is there. And again, that includes the free download if you don't want to, you don't have to download things twice. But if you want to get the free download and just see what you think, and then you can always go back and get the bundle if the download really speaks to you. Everything is here for you. I'm trying to help, trying to make more things available, but I gave you, as always, tons of great tools and tips here. And of course, there's always my free mindfulness starter kit if you need to start with mindfulness. And I know I yelled at you a few times today. I love you. I love my HSPs that are in my life. I love you in my One Love Collective group on Substack. I love you in my friendships. I value you. I know in my 20s and 30s, I was always impatient with you. And in my 40s, 50s, and 60s, I've learned, oh my gosh, how incredibly valuable you are in my life. I'm grateful. And in our world, you give so much. So I'm going to cry. You know me, I start crying. Thank you. Thank you for being you. Please don't change. Please find ways to incorporate everything I've said today and be proud of who you are. Step into it with great love, because I love you. All right. Mwah. Having a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you real soon.